peace processes have started inside prison, and there are many examples of this as well. And more recently, and more appropriate for the book that we're introducing, prisons have been the focal point for programs which have helped to de-radicalize and disengage individuals from terrorism. So when it comes to radicalization, prisons have been places of both radicalization and de-radicalization, contributors to terrorism and net contributors to countering terrorism. But despite their potentially important role, there have been surprisingly few scientific investigations of radicalization and de-radicalization in prison. And the main goal of our project that we're announcing today has been to try to change that situation. Our report examines government policies and approaches on prison radicalization and de-radicalization in 15 countries around the globe. It's the most comprehensive and systematic survey of its kind up to this time. It involves 16 experts who've studied prison radicalization and de-radicalization in their countries for many years. And some of these experts, I think, are in the room today. Omar Ashar, for example, Laila Bokhari, Rohan Gunaratne, Aryeh Kruglansky, Jean-Luc Marais, and Marisa Porgas, I think, have all been at the conference and maybe in the room right now. To provide some coherence for this project, each of our experts were asked to examine several core questions in preparing their analysis. How should terrorists be dealt with in prisons? What's the best prison regime for terrorists? What do we know about preventing radicalization in prisons? What efforts have been undertaken, both individually and collectively, to make prisoners de-radicalize or disengage from terrorism? How successful have these efforts been? Our study obviously hasn't found definitive answers to all these questions. In many cases, in fact, there may not be definitive and universal answers. But we have, I think, learned a great deal about the context under which these sorts of questions can be addressed and many of the nuances that come up in this examination. What we have done is identify dilemmas, trade-offs, principles, and best practices from these 15 countries. And we obviously hope that our findings will allow governments to avoid costly and counterproductive mistakes as they go forward. And more generally, we hope that the results will help persuade governments to pay more attention to prisons and have a more open approach toward the possibilities of reform within them. In fact, one of the main conclusions of the report is that opportunities for reform in many countries are probably being missed. So with that introduction, I would like to turn the floor over to Peter Neumann, who's going to give a very brief summary of some of the key findings and recommendations. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you very much, Hans. This is a report. It's outside, and I was instructed by Katie Rothman to say that we don't want to take any publications back to London. This actually costs us money, so please do take as many as you can. We have plenty of them, and there's a PDF on the internet as well if you want to forward it to other people. I obviously, in 8 minutes, won't be able to offer you more than a teaser of what's in the report, won't even attempt to give you a proper or in any way comprehensive overview, because the report, I believe, is simply too rich in detail. It's reflecting too many different national experiences to come up with one or two very blunt conclusions. What I want to do in the next 8 minutes is to give you 5 points which are coming directly out of our research. 5 points which will hopefully make you want to go to the publications table, pick up the report, and actually read it. So here we go. Point number 1, and this is picking up on something that Gary already mentioned. We shouldn't be surprised that radicalization is happening in prisons. Prisons are places in which people are confronted with their past in particularly intensive ways, with the result that they often search for new meaning, identities, and beliefs. They've left their families and friends behind when they enter prison. They need a new family, new social networks, and yes, in some prisons, they also need physical protection. And a lot of people who go into prisons are angry young men. They are rebels and they want to defy the system. So if you take those 3 factors, 3 conditions that are inherent in the prison environment, being confronted with your past, searching for new identity, having to form new social networks, wanting to defy the system, it's very easy to see how this is fertile ground for people who want to radicalize and recruit. And it's easy to see how, if you are in that sort of situation, radical, religiously framed narratives can be very appealing. Prisons, however, haven't been paid enough attention to. Even in Western countries, in France, in the United States, in Britain, terrorist plots have come out of prison, yet not much of the public attention has been focused on that particular place. And that, we believe, needs to change. Leads me to my second point. Second point is preventing prison radicalization definitely isn't necessarily rocket science. Much of what you're looking for to prevent prison radicalization isn't actually about preventing prison radicalization per se. It's about running good prisons. If you have overcrowded, understaffed prisons in which prison guards are abusive, racist, or both, then of course radicals and recruiters will take advantage of that. If you have prisons in which no proper religious services, moderate religious services are being offered, then of course that's an opportunity for extremists to fill that vacuum. The most dramatic example that I was particularly impressed by came from Laila Bukhari from Pakistan, a country with 41,000 prison places and over 90,000 prisoners, most of them held on remand, many of them having been in prison for years on end without their trial ever materializing. No separation between terrorists and ordinary criminal prisoners. They can freely mingle, and they do. Prison staff being often corrupt, incidents of mistreatments being frequent. Now, if you have that sort of situation, the need is not for an individual de-radicalization program. The need is for a fundamental reform of the prison, if not the entire justice system.